How many times did Jesus cleanse the temple? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of John on Walking Through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, turn to John chapter 2. We're going to be reading from verses 13 to 25. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, John chapter 2, beginning of verse 13. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." Then his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." So the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign do you show to us, since you do these things?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to him, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, during the feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he did. But Jesus did not commit himself to them, because he knew all men, and had no need that anyone should testify of man, for he knew what was in man. In our last lesson, we discussed Jesus turning water into wine, a sign to show that as the Christ he had the power of a nature, a sign that would have to be true if Jesus was God. Coming to verse 13 now, some time has passed between verses 12 and 13. How much time has passed, we're not entirely sure, but it could be as much as 6 months. It is Passover time, a pilgrimage feast when all males in Israel were to come to Jerusalem, and Jesus was no exception. We're going to see in John that many of his stories are told in relation to the Jewish feasts, especially Passover, and so we should not only take careful note of that, but also realize that many of the events of the intervening year are not going to be mentioned by John. Whatever we have recorded here as occurring at this, the first Passover mentioned by John, is Jesus cleansing the temple. The fact that Jesus cleansed the temple here in John 2 has some scholars and many skeptics wondering if, or outright accusing John, to be contradicting the Synoptic Gospels. That's because all 3 of those Gospels have Jesus cleansing the temple at the end of his ministry, while John appears to have him cleansing the temple at the beginning, while omitting the cleansing of the temple during the week of Jesus' crucifixion. There have been a few solutions to solve this apparent problem. The first is that there were 2 cleansings of the temple. Since the Synoptic Gospels leave out almost all of Jesus' Judean ministry, which occurred at the beginning, that is why they left out the first cleansing. And since John leaves out much of the public teaching of Jesus that occurs during the crucifixion week, that is why he leaves out the second cleansing. Another solution is to simply state that John is giving us a story out of order, as the Gospels have had a habit of doing. John thus chose to highlight here the cleansing of the temple to show Christ's religious authority. So which solution do I believe makes the most sense? The first one, where Christ cleansed the temple twice. The reason I believe this is because of how the text flows, not only here at the end of chapter 2, but into chapters 3 and 4. In verses 23 to 25 of this chapter, it says that while Jesus was in Jerusalem, many believed, which would be consistent with this being the Passover during the crucifixion week. But it also said that Jesus wasn't going to commit himself to them, for he had no need of their testimony from them. If this was the Passover week of the crucifixion, it doesn't make that much sense that John would include such a statement, for at the time of the writing of this book, John knew that Jesus was about to die and would not need such testimony. However, if this was at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, then it makes much more sense as to why people might want to testify of Jesus, because he was largely unknown. Jesus didn't want them to because he knew of the general unreliability and untrustworthiness of man. not wanting others to testify of him, would also be consistent with Jesus' attitude at the beginning of his ministry in the book of Mark. More evidence for an early cleansing of the temple comes from chapter 3 and the story of Nicodemus. If the story of the cleansing of the temple is inserted here for thematic effect, then the story of Nicodemus occurs pretty soon after the wedding at Cana. Yet John doesn't mention any passage of time, something that is unusual for this book. If, however, the cleansing of the temple is not an insertion, then it is connected with John 3, verses 1 to 21, and is also connected to the events at the end of John 3, which occurred before John the Baptist is thrown into prison. When taken together, I therefore believe that there is ample evidence to show that Jesus cleansed the temple twice, once at the beginning and once at the end of his ministry. As for the cleansing of the temple itself, what happened here is pretty similar to what happened 3 years later. Jesus threw out the money changers and those who were conducting business on the temple grounds. The temple was a place of prayer and not a place to conduct business. Now, like it was with the second cleansing, the Jews wanted to know who gave him the authority to do these things. They wanted a sign to prove this authority. But instead of asking them a question about the baptism of John, he said the sign would be that if he destroys this temple, in 3 days Jesus would raise it up. The Jews were flabbergasted with that answer, for the temple of Ezra and Nehemiah's day that Herod expanded upon had taken 46 years to build, and yet Jesus said he would raise it in 3 days. Jesus, of course, was talking about the temple of his body, that he would die and be raised 3 days later. Those who didn't believe didn't understand this, and some would even later bring this charge against him at his trial in Matthew 26:61. Jesus, however, did have authority to cleanse the temple because he was the Christ, the Son of God. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of John chapter 3, verses 1 to 8, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.